Okay, I'm just going to share a few things about my chart that I'm seeing, and then we'll see how you see it, and yeah, let's take it from there. So immediately, I haven't touched my chart since I would say, well, it's been at least 2 weeks or a week and a half, anyways, because we were down in here last time I touched my chart in the end of January, and now we're February 16th. So just simply put, I marked out some levels here. You've got your weekly, you've got a 4 hour here that got hit, and then you've got kind of a reverse 4 here, or what I think might have been an origin. So, for me, looking at targets after targets, kind of what I do is I just like to go through and set out all those targets. Like, I'd like to have every single target in the loop of things, right? Like, at first I had the weekly right here. You can see my screen okay?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay, good. First we had the weekly there, then we have the 4 hour here, and then we have what could create the origin here, which will be breakout in the future, and we had the daily. And the reason I had the daily here is because I was thinking that if you reverse the daily, what's going to happen is you're going to be able to create a trend off of that, because at least it has an angle. So those are kind of like my standout levels here. Going down into lower time frames, I think what you would be doing then, I think, is you would be saying here's another origin level at that point. This would be another pretty good target here to have. And then you would really just be going kind of here and saying, like, where's the combo levels? Like, you could go here and put the hourly, so we can mark that. And then we can go right here, and there's another untested hourly. And I would also look at this origin and say, okay, like, this is obviously tested. That's obviously tested and broken. This origin here doesn't really make sense to me, but this one does. So, like, whenever I'm building out the architecture of my levels, like, what I want to do is I want to kind of mark out the higher levels. Like, I added the blues, so and this red trend. So, like, we don't need that red trend. We can just kind of delete that. Um, you're in pretty big time frames here, so I think that's one of the first important things to realize is that, when this thing was falling, it's like, okay, well, here's the weekly level. It's going to bounce off that like it did here, and then fall through it and cause that as resistance, and try to regain this weekly. And it's going to try to regain this weekly by going and testing through all of these kind of levels, right, to see, if it can actually start hard closing again over that, and then, creating the final trend here to break the move. That's kind of how I would look at, like, this right now anyways, to see the current part of the move. So then when we go back to our replayer tool, we can see that we did test the weekly, which is exactly what we would expect to do here. That level right there, and then everything inside the range, because the range can actually go all the way up to here. So we can even have something like this as a final level, and we can even go over that, creating it as an origin for the future. But if you were to break this, then obviously Bitcoin's an accumulation again, right? So you could come up here, hit it like that. You could come down here. You could create a trend off of this, and then, as time goes on, when you break that trend, that's when you'd break that level. So you can also have this level up here, and they're all going to mean different things when they test. Like, the weekly origin here, it's not created yet, obviously, so that's just kind of like, oh, well, we wouldn't look to take this spot as price is 25,200. We would never short that. Rather, we would try to go a little bit above it and see if there's something playing back from this range here, maybe even something like this, or that's a little high, but maybe even something a little lower time frame. Maybe there's a 4 hour somewhere stuck in here, and then you could be somewhere kind of like this. So, like, as a first touch to this level here, what I would do is I would say, okay, well, we can create this as an origin, but we're not going to just hit it and move down. We're going to go over it. It's going to reject that level and fail through and say, hey, I did try to gain it. I hit something, and then, I fell straight down, therefore making this the right buy in the future. Then at that point, you could say, okay, that's an origin. We can buy that. And then, you'd create trend here. And when that trend breaks, then this origin would break, kind of thing. So that's kind of how I would see my levels here on the chart. And I would say, okay, well, that's good, right? And then you've got the bottom side levels there too. So if we were to go to the daily here, we can now see, you hit that weekly, you're trying to gain that weekly, you hit the 4 hour, your next level in the range, you pull the rate back, you develop the base of the move, kind of like this stuff in here. You hit it, you pull back, you develop the range. So now at least we have something like this as the range. So at least we have that range work there now. So that's good. You just make a triangle, might make it a little more visible, right? You have
Yeah.
whatever range you end up developing here, you have
Right.
that, right? And then you fall back, you're back testing this 4 hour level here, which ends up just being a reverse in the trail. You're going and testing this 4 hour origin here, so we know this is going to be a breakout point now. So that's pretty important to know. So that's going to be a breakout point for this range. So, like, if you start hard closing over this level, you're probably going to hop skip over these. So right now, if we were to go back up again, I would say, okay, we have created this as an origin level. There's no real trend to create here. Like maybe on the 4 hour, like you could have something like this on the 4. So this might be the range you're looking at. So then you'd want to do is you'd want to kind of go in closer and you'd say like, okay, well, we're going to try to break this origin. And we do have a trend that does come from kind of the base of that creation of that move on the same time frame. So we kind of have two things we can do here now, and we're not quite at that point yet, but we have either we can go straight up and hit this here over the next couple days, over the next weeks. Like these are 4 hour time frames, so this is a healthy amount of time. So we can go straight up and hit this origin, and if we do go straight up, that's a spot where I'd be like, okay, that's kind of a smart buy. Or this thing could get drawn out and it could, kind of do something like this and this and this. And then over here, I would be looking at this trend test. I would not be looking at this origin. I'd say, okay, it's going to pull back. It's going to kind of go up to here, fall short of the origin. But when it starts hard closing over top of that trend,
Trend.
this is going to break. Like this is no longer going to hold. So then we can at least have some type of dictation of, hey, what, like where, based on what time this thing is happening, we now have kind of like the idea of what to take as a short, because like the nightmare scenarios you get out here and you're like, oh yeah, I'm going to just short this trend. And then you get over here and you're like kind of just closing over this. And then it goes here and you're like, oh, short. And then it's like, straight up, right? Because that's what that trend is going to do. So like, at least we have some type of dictation of time now with this trend. So we can measure against how soon this is likely to happen or how fast this is going to happen versus what makes the right sense to buy. So that's what kind of how I would like make sense of this level here. And each level I kind of have a thought process like this on. I do have a thought process for each level. This here is the hourly level. So like I would take this as an entry, as a short. And then you can see it did actually hit that as a reverse, right? So like you're
Right.
going through that queue, you hit the 4 hour, the next would be that hourly reverse. So that was like a nice little perfect short there. So like that makes sense there as a reverse because you did go for the higher level. If you had just done something like, we wouldn't have this trend here, of course, yet. But if you had just done something like this and you went for this hourly level here, I'd be like, okay, so we're not creating the hold level, and this would create another range to break. So you'd kind of do something like this. And this would almost make that origin level not really relevant in a way, because then you'd have a trend like that, and then you'd be out here and you'd be breaking that trend to go after like one of the deeper levels. So this origin level wouldn't even be in play at that point. But because, let's just get back to the replayer tool here. Because it was the origin level that was gone after first, right? Like you did hit that origin level. The 1 hour can act as a reverse, which is perfect here. You have the 4 hour, tries to gain the 4 hour, stabilizes the base of the move, doesn't actually go back down to its range trend, right? Stabilizes the move down here. So technically it's still laddering targets up top, and it's still technically laddering targets up top, even if you were to kind of still do this. Like we're still moving up. Like the range is still good. Like we're still, we're still right here. Like you're still fraying out your trend work. So that's fine. We haven't diagnosed the bottom yet. But anyways, for short targets at the top, that's why this hourly makes sense there. Now, no longer makes sense as the hourly, right? Like you've got something like this that
Right.
I'm sure. Um, okay, so that slightly broke over, and you probably have like a origin back dating to here on a different time frame. It looks like this was the origin, maybe, or maybe even like right
15
here.
minutes. I was working on it.
Yeah. Okay. Good. So you know where that origin is. So I don't have to find that one. And yeah, now at this point, I would just go back in here and say, okay, so like where are we at now? Like where are we at? We've taken this daily, right? And we've laddered this daily move here. So we've laddered the move here, we've laddered the move there. So really what we need to do is we need to find this range trend right here. So that's something I immediately notice on my chart, because we have two trends here, right? We have like the trend from the very top, but we also have the range trend, and the range trend being that this is part of this move here, and it tested this. This is where you're using a range trend. If you had gone up and tested something like this up in here, or like the hourly level right here, that's the trend you need to use. So like if you went and tested this part of the range, which would be the final combination of hold levels right here, right? Because that's just an untested hold after you hit the very
Yeah.
high of the move. So that's very straightforward. Like if it hit that there, we would be using this trend as our range trend. But it didn't. It actually stopped in this part of the range. So you've got two ranges here. You've got that one there and that one there. So now I would like to delete this actually, because I don't want it there. And now I need to use this as my range trend. And we have to find that time frame. And hopefully we have it. Hopefully it's just a -1 here on the time frame. It is. Okay, good. So you've actually got to use this hourly. So we want to pin this hourly here. I am going to change it blue as well, because I do want to know that this is an hourly trend, right? Here. and you're at the same reach point. So you just like re-snap it on the hourly and you're good. And then you've got your range trend for the move. You've got your what could be a reverse level, but unlikely. More so the trend is going to be holding this move here. So like at this point, I would just kind of do this and be like, okay, well, yeah, we're good. Like if anything's going to reject this move, I suppose you could leave the origin on, because you can come up and reject that origin, but really I'd be focusing on trend, because when you start hard closing this, I would expect this range to collapse and for you to go for the higher part of the move up here. That's kind of like where I would like to be with this move. Um, and how I would look at the top of that. So what I'm doing here, and what you need to do is when you mark the levels, you have to create like a logical sense to why they exist. And not only why do they exist, but you also have to create the kind of flow of what makes sense. Like this trend, why does it exist? Well, it exists because you attacked that part of the range, and this is the range trend, meaning that this range will break once this range trend breaks. So that's like, why is it there? And how did it get created? Well, we can see the how because we just walked through it. And we marked all the levels and made sense of them. So we said, here's a 4 hour, here's a 1 hour, here's a 4 hour origin, here's a daily. And now we have a trend. And this trend exists because we tested this origin here and we found that range trend. So what information are they telling you? How do they exist and why, right? So that's kind of like some of the questions you need to ask yourself when you're looking at these levels and saying, hey, I need to develop kind of what makes sense in this move, and which levels are going to tell me what. This is kind of getting into like advanced logic flow, right? So then if we looked at the bottom side of the chart, we could very much get into the same thing. Highest time frame, I have this marked as a daily. I wonder why. It's definitely not a daily. I think I just mismarked that. So this is a 4. Let's start with that. Let's mark the 4 hour here on the bottom, right? Because that's the same thing. Like you get your range trend here in the move. You've got your 4 hour hold level that has been holding. It's been reversing the move. Do you have any 4 hour origins here? Like that's the first thing I would do. You have an origin right here. This is kind of almost acting the same thing as this origin up top. So actually, we mark this as a 4 and we kind of look at what happened as a mirror on the top. You have a 4 hour here, pushes through, goes after the 4 hour origin after hitting the 4 hour hold level, and then it's laddering off of that. So you have a 4 hour hold level here, which hits. It goes a little deeper than it, but that's fine. It still goes deeper here. A little bit of volatility is not terrible for anybody. And then after that, it goes after its origin, which is here. So they both had kind of their one origin test. This ladders off the hourly. I would almost wonder if this side laddered off an hourly too. Hit that origin and your hourly would have been here, which it does. It ladders off that hourly. It's still holding that hourly, but more importantly, I want to see this 4. Like I don't really care about this hourly. I care about that 4 hour because it was just tested, but it did kind of mirror the same thing on the top. So then you've kind of got the same thing happening. You've got a range trend on this side, you've got a range trend on this side. If you wanted to do something kind of cool, you could do like, what am I looking for here? Here it is. You could do like big fat line there and a big fat line here, just to kind of as your 2, just to say like, okay, this is like where the move is being controlled, right? Like this range trend against that one, and this one can go much lower. Like you can get into a range down here by testing out some of this stuff. So this can go much lower, but for now that's where we're at. So then I would look at this and I would say, okay, well, like we're still laddering the move on this side. We've back tested this 4 hour like 1, 2, 3 times now. Our 4 hours up here haven't really been back tested. It looks like you have some kind of like point, a backside here, which hasn't been hit. Then you've got like the total thing here, which it's kind of weird. I wouldn't use that. I would just use something like this, which just brings you back to the higher part of the range, or even something like this to break out of that move there. So if we were going to go up to attack these higher levels, I'd need to see this broken first, right? Because this is what was hit. At first it was this, which was fine, but then it does go for the higher part of the move. And even right here, 4 hour, possibly it's not hit. You need to see what's hit next, because this is the first touch on that one and this is the first hit on that one. So if you go below this wick here, this is your origin. If you go above this wick, well, this is your origin, because that's the first test. The second test will happen on here. This is your first test here, second test can happen there. If you do that, then you need to create another range trend here, this off this, wherever that goes to here, because then that'll control the range break of this. And then you're just kind of repeating that through and through your actual move. So then, you could be like this and start, okay, well, we need to make this thin because that's really big. That's way too big. Then you'd be pulling back to here, and then you have that there, and you kind of have your fraying of ranges, right? Like you're adapting of ranges, or you're forking out of ranges, or global, legacy, local, or sorry, I should say legacy, global, local, in that order. But then what you're seeing me do here is I'm talking through the move. I'm making sense of the trend work right now, because we are in a range. We are kind of Pandora's boxing or mirroring, Pandora's box 2.0 or mirroring. So we are doing that. And you want to start to look for things like floating levels too. Like right now, this wick got broken over, so this would be your floating level. So if you hit this one right here, this would completely crush the move, and you would likely be breaking the bottom side of the range. You did have a floating level here, which would have been in this moment right here, but that's kind of tested and exhausted. So you wouldn't be really using that. You're just going after something lower in the move. You don't really have any floating levels on the bottom. What you'd look for here if you want to break down is the creation of a floating level right now. So you'd want to do something like this, break down, and then if you hit this backside, that would be like the backside float, or this front side. You'd be at one of those two levels, and if it holds, the whole move is broken, right? So then you've got your kind of floating levels that you have to make sense of, like what scenarios could happen. Well, you could create a float. There could be reverse levels here. That's where it starts to take time to make sense of the move and say, well, what is actually happening in this move? You know what I mean? Like you have to actually have that time to say, oh, I've got to diagnose this thing, and why is it moving like this? And yeah, what are all the possibilities, like floating levels, reverse levels, trends, like which are the possibilities that this thing's gonna have this perfect movement, or where is it going? So one of the things you need to look at when you're thinking of logic flow in these levels is, as a first step, you need to mark the correct levels, which is like, of course, that's the hardest part, because if you mark the incorrect information, you're broken from zero. So it doesn't matter how much, like it's like making sense out of something that doesn't exist. Well, you can't do it because it doesn't exist, right? So like marking out the correct information is like ground one, like step number one. Like you have to refine your technicals until you're at a point where you say like, oh, this is perfect. Because everybody can mark the levels. They're fairly easy to see, right? Like it's like, this is a whole level, that's a reverse level, this is a floating level, that's a origin, this is a trend. Like marking those out properly is ground zero. So that's always like the number one thing whenever I'm trying to teach someone how to do like proper logic flows. Like make sure you have the correct levels. Number two is start talking about the levels and having them make sense. Like, okay, here was the 4 hours. So the second step in this is, whoopsies, let me just control Z that. I've got a new keyboard I'm working with, so I'm a little rusty with it. I'm not quite proficient with it yet. But the second thing is you have to mark levels, and you have to start thinking about what they represent and talk about, like, okay, here's a hold level. What does this mean? Okay, this can ladder the move. So at this point, this move was hit and we were just straight laddering down. So like I could have like an easy trend from something like the top of this move. This move is very simple at this point. I could have just been like, oh, we're just laddering like this, right? Like easy peasy move, and there's not much more to consider. But then it actually ladders the bottom side. So it goes after the top and it breaks past that. So now you're creating floating levels off the bottom, right? Like you've got some larger time frame basis here because you did break above the wick. And if this continues to ladder the move off of this trend, which it did, it never even tested trend, well, you're going to go after your next level. Then you've got the origin here, right? So it's about having all the levels marked and then saying like, well, if this can't hold it, it's going to try to break the range. Is there anything in the way? Well, there's a possible origin here. So actually it's got to go attack that in order to break that. Otherwise it could have just shot straight through the range. Like if this wasn't here, oopsies, that's the wrong one. If this guy wasn't here, it could have possibly just broken straight up for this daily, and that would have created the range. So you've still got a daily there, which the daily is, okay, you've got the daily hold level, that's fine. The saving grace there is that it could have laddered off this, so your daily would have been your target. Had this ladder point not been here, like had you gone and tested the wick of this move, you could have went and gone after the body, which is not likely at that point. You have to ladder below the wick, right? So then you have to be laddering below the wick of the move. So if this wick wasn't that high, then you would have been saying like, okay, well, there's no move here. You've hit this 4, you're going to go to the next range, but there's still things in the range that are in the way. So when this 4 gets hit, gapping to the next part of the range, and that range trend needs to be created. Again, had this not been there, had that not been there, had that not been there, had that not been there, you would have simply had like a very simple, here's your trend, break that, you're going up to here as a target, right? Like you're going to your next range. But the key thing here is that there's still things in the way of the range. So you can't go straight for it because you have to create the range trend, and the range trend has to break. And sometimes when these range trends are here, what'll happen is you'll have a hold level here and you'll go up to it and you'll test it and you'll try to get it, and then you gain it and it just completely breaks the move. Like you don't even have a consideration here, just go straight through. But that's also because the final hold level was broken. So then you have a different little bit of work to do with, hold levels and seeing what the trail is there, and if the Pandora's box inside the inner range is broken. But then that's like step number two is once you've marked all the proper levels, step number two
Right.
is talking about them and talking it through and making sense out of them, saying, why does this happen here? And that's the way I like to do it. So when I say talking it through, I mean like doing a lot of self-talk. Because whenever I'm doing levels, even when I'm streaming or doing whatever, I'm sitting there, I'm like, oh, okay, this level's gonna be like this, and that's the reason why this whole level's here, and that 4-hour origin's gonna hit, and this can create the range trend. And I'm even always talking to myself throughout these things, no matter what, whether I'm teaching, whether the self-talk keeps you sharp and it allows you to see things clear, because then you say something out loud that's not right, you can catch it. And then so there's like a whole bunch of reasons why you would do that self-talk, but that's fine. I think a lot of people do that anyways. And that's number two. And that's the second thing you would do is making sense of those levels. And then number three is doing like the more intricate and advanced pieces and saying like, okay, well, if we're going to break that, what's the trail that we have to do, which is like the inside of the range, right? Then we're doing that inner range work where we have this here, and then you might have something like this here as a first start. And if that's, breaking there, what happens? Is it just cycling out to create, like, does this end up getting hit and creating the origin? So when this breaks, does that shift happen here, like this, to wherever it tests out here, and then that's controlling the range, right? Like if you come and test it, oh, sorry, that was way too far. If you come and test it like right here, and it actually does say like, oh, oopsies, not that one. It says, oh, this is the origin level. Then we have to draw the trend from here, right? Because that's like controlling the move. And then you have like the right trend to work with. If you just go to, let's put this back. If you just go to this one here, what you would be doing is you'd be saying, okay, well, there's no trend to draw from here, from that point there. There's no trend to draw. So if you were to draw it, it would be incorrect, right? Like you'd be here. So you don't actually have a range trend in this. So what you would do is at that point, you'd be adapting this trend, right? Because you'd be saying, okay, the range is actually up here. It's not there because this range can be controlled here. But this range here, it doesn't really have a controlling piece. Like I suppose you could go to an hourly time frame and do this, but like you'd have to move violently up and then rip straight back down in order to create this here as a range trend. Like it's not really going to happen. It's a very rare scenario that I just wouldn't put a lot of weight on there. So then that's the thing, right? Like what level does it hit? And that's where you have to make sense of kind of those, like, okay, well, what would happen next, right? That's where you have to make sense of that and say, oh yeah, like this origin got hit, therefore this is the controlling range trend, or this one got hit, there is no controlling range trend, so you're actually cycling out the larger trend, right? So then that's kind of your third step, is to have those like inside the range movements where you've marked the correct levels as step number one, you've talked them through to give them logic as step number two, and now you're applying the trades as step number three. Like what makes sense here? So for me, this actually makes sense. So if I was in this trade, what I would look for now, I would say, okay, well, what's inside of this range? So like, let's take it one step further. What can ladder this, reject this origin here? Let's delete that one. What can reject this origin and ladder this, but not quite touch this? Because I don't want to touch this because I want to create a trend off it. Like even if it was like right there, cool. So then what I would do is I'd go in here and I'd be like, okay, reverse level hourly. 15-minute. Ooh, 15-minute reverse. It's kind of tested though. So like, I guess you kind of have to be in here now. And that's not really tested. Like you can go right here. 15. Let's check that hourly again. I have a suspicion. Hourly origin? Nah, that's yucky. I don't like that. Hourly was tested here, wasn't it? Okay, so you have an hourly origin right here. And that's okay. And you can create that as a 4-hour. So that's good to know. So that hourly origin is there. And then you could ladder that. Okay, what else do we have? Let's go down. Like this stuff is too high. That's outside of the range because this origin is here. Got a 5-minute right here, but that's kind of getting pretty thin. Like, I mean, I'm not really feeling this 5-minute level, if I'm being honest. What else do we have? 3-minute level already got tested and reversed. You got a 3-minute here. Like this is all really close. I don't really know where you would draw the line here and say like, oh, I want to save $5 more. Like, I don't know if you can hit 6 levels at once and it's all $5 away. You just take the greediest one and you got minute trend here and here. So you've got like something here that would be like really greedy. I don't know if you quite want to go that greedy, but let's go back to the 15-minute, zoom out, take a look at what it looks like, take the replayer tool off. So then go back to the 4, make sure we have that marked correctly. So you got your 4-hour here. Do want to kind of test that. You do have a 4-hour reverse right here. So I do kind of like that. I do kind of like this 4-hour reverse. Yeah, actually, you know what? I like this. Greedier past that is, what are we talking about? $5? What is it? 24 to 32. So is that like $8? Like there's no difference in price here. There's no 11%. So you can cover 2 levels if you get this. So I would then forego this 15. 5, 3, 4 hour and a 1 minute. So I think what I would do, if you were to measure this entire thing, you've got 1, 2, 3, 4, and the trend creation, 5 levels being covered in a 19% spread. So then I would say, okay, is 19% too much risk for me to take on this move? Uh, like I don't like 19% because if it spikes past this and does something from back in this range, I don't like that. So I would probably forego those two. And I would say now, like, okay, well, what about this 10% or 9% or 11? We just call it 10% because I'm not quite pinned to the right spot, but $8 here. So like, I think it was $8. Um, no, that was 2 different levels. So 32 to 56. So it's like $24. Is it worth it for $24? 10% to take the greedier level, or should I just take this? We're just gonna call 10%. I don't know. I think it depends on the leverage I use. And I think I would, at this point, before making that decision, like to look at what happens on the bottom of this. Because you could just kind of come up to here, but then that's there. This is holding that there. So you did hard closes. So this is gone. So this can never be a level because it is hard closed. So that level here mean that got something like this to here, which would be here. Then what I'd like to do is I'd like to take that. This is going to break no matter what. So we don't need this. And hourly we don't need. Yeah, I think I just kind of like the 4 hour there. I think I don't like going past it greedy. I don't think for the 10% it would be worth it on that trade. And then I can at least draw a trend from this to whatever tests here. Like I like that. That's kind of how I would look at that decision too, right? Like I have to go through my levels and I have to find all the levels and dissect them and say, like, which one makes sense and why? Which one can create the trend? Which one is the greediest point? Like now you're asking some of the questions that you would ask procedurally before the trade happens. Like which one is the greediest point? Which one would I be comfortable taking? Bankroll management. How much leverage should I use on this? Like should I go for that 4 hour level? And maybe if my normal is $10,000 on 100x, should I go and should I just do like 1,000 or 1,500 on the 4 hour level and then do like, I don't know, something 3,000 or 4,000 on that 1 minute level? And at least in both scenarios, I get filled, but one position is slightly worse. Instead of risking a full $10,000 spot, could I have some kind of hybrid system where I risk, 4,500 or 5,000 across 2 levels differently? I make money no matter what. How much money is to be made is, to be decided. But then, I'm tackling that procedural layer now. So I'm tackling that. Here's the levels. Here's how they make sense, and what should I really look for when I'm trying to make this decision on what to trade next. And then I would do the same thing on the bottom, and I'd say, okay, well, we kind of have a plan for up top. What do we want to do on the bottom here? So the bottom, we kind of have to like deconstruct the entire thing. We'll do a quick version of this. We have the 4 hour level being hit here. We have the origin here. Do I want to go after that origin? If we start falling fast, I think I want to go for that origin because we can test the origin and hold this level. So if we're down here, what time is it now? You got, if by today we move down here, like if we keep moving, chunking down like this really fast, and we can get to a point where we can deep dive this trend but go after this level, I would totally do that, because then I can be like, oh yeah, easy. Like you've got this here can just now adapt out to there, right? And then you'd be like this here. And then you don't even need this trend. So that trend is just kind of gone. I don't really know if you would want to go after this. Maybe backside level. Nah, I don't like it. This stuff is all so exhausted that I actually want to just go lower time frame at this point. I think we've got a trend, and I think this trend has to hold now because this trend is representing this part of the move, and I don't even know if you can really take this as an entry. So I don't think I'd even like that after looking at this, because I'm realizing this has hit, it did deep dive it, and now it's laddering, and you've created your range trend here. So like this kind of has to hold. So now I'd like to go and I'd like to just like start from the hourly time frame and just see like, what do I have here? No origins back from here, which would have been nice if we had a nice clean one there, but we don't yet. And then that's a keyword there, is yet. We've got that there. This one is not hard closed, but what was in existence first? 1, 2. This is not an origin yet. So you kind of have this right here you could ladder off of. So I'd like to mark this. I'm not convinced this is it yet. This is just kind of like the start, but that would ladder this, which is kind of the point. So that would be something that we could pay attention to. What a 15-minute. I'd like to find the origin. Like it can't be here because that's hard closed over there. And so it also can be right here, question mark. So you could create an origin there. Could you also create it here? All in the same, you could create it here, which means you kind of want to ladder off of this. So I actually kind of like this right here. If I were to use this as an origin. It's not even an origin yet. We don't have any origins. I actually just like this as a straight up hold level. I actually just like this as a straight up like low time frame hold level. We don't have any origins. We don't have anything else. It does ladder that part of the move. The only other thing you could consider is if you wanted to go and do that right there. But I think at that point you're like, oh, $13. This origin can deep dive, so you don't even really buy this. Rather, you're kind of buying like a low time frame hold in here. Then I would say, okay, what time frame are you buying down there? Well, there's no 5-minute. Sucks. What a 3? Yeah, there's no 3. Okay, that sucks too. What about a 1? Do you have a 1? Let's see. Yeah, we have a 1 right here. So like then you have this, right? Like and then so like you're now deconstructing this and reduced down to, okay, do you have an origin level you're buying here, or do you have a combination off the hold? Because for me, this origin doesn't really matter, because if I hit this 1 minute, yes, we create the origin here on the 15. Yes, this becomes an origin, but this also becomes a reverse. So in the future, I would be buying this origin regardless. Whether it hits or not, it's $13 away from the ladder point. The ladder point is the safer buy there because you're talking about such a small difference. So actually here, I think I would just go for the 1 minute and reverse the 15 in the future. Don't have any hourly, or you could go for trend, right? Like you've got that decision 1, 2, 3, and if you go for trend, what can you hit below? So now this is kind of a question of speed. Like if we're just going to drop straight down, we can go a little bit under this trend and test something. Ideally, we'd want to ladder this. So then you would go and you would deconstruct this part of the move here to see like, hey, is there any origins here that we could go after? So like if there was an origin rate here, that's still above the 15. This doesn't make sense. It's really thin. There's not anything, but let's pretend there was one there. I might go for this because it can ladder this still, and this point, I think I would just go for trend. I think I would just go for this trend, because then if it goes straight down, I would like to use that 15 as a reverse, completely kill this. Maybe interior in the moment, what you could do, another thing you could do is you could wait to see if this gets hit and not take the buy, and then you could rebuy the test of this reverse, and then you go up, and then this is your reverse buy in the future, right? Like that. So like you could do that with this trade, or you could just go for the straight knife catch on this. You could go like, maybe just like a little bit under it. That's still laddering above this. I don't know. You're kind of splitting hairs at that point. Like, how much does it actually get you? Like, say you go from here to here, like you're saving 7%. Like, I don't know if it's worth missing possible 4-hour trend buy to save 7%. If the sucker was all the way down here and you're like, oh, 40%, yeah, sure, 40%, but like 7%, I don't know, it kind of seems like you're splitting hairs. So if you were deciding between buying this origin, this 15 minute, this 1 minute, this trend, I would probably just go for the trend. If you ladder this here, obviously your ladder points are from here to here now. Like obviously you've got ladder here, here, here. So like when you get up here, the architecture, you can't really break that because it's controlling this. So then you have like a very aggressive ladder if you bounce off this. If you bounce off these down here, your ladder point doesn't exist from this point. It exists from this point, like almost as this is not even on the chart, like almost as if this doesn't even like scribble that off the chart that way. It wouldn't even matter if you go down to this stuff in here, because now your ladder point is from here to here. But again, hit that 4-hour level, and your ladder point is now from here to here, and then so you can't break below this in the future. So that's the range you have to play. So you're starting to play stuff like those origins, right? As opposed to if it was to go down to here, then this, like, none of this makes sense here. You don't need to use that as the ladder base. Your ladder's from here to here. So the ladder point, instead of being here, would be here, right? So just the difference in the way it plays out based on the level that makes sense here. That's also something to be aware of, right? Like that's how I'd kind of like deconstruct the bottom side of this move, and then work with it in a way where I'm saying like, okay, what makes sense on the levels, and where does that kind of like, how does that translate, right? Like which level is being hit and how does that translate forward into the charts? So that's kind of how I would deconstruct the bottom of this move, the top of this move, and then I'd make decisions off it. And then you also have to work further into this, and that's just a very quick inner look at the way in which you could analyze the range to take the spots. So those scenarios I just created would be if you say, do I agree that this thing is going to kind of go like this for a little while? Do I agree that this thing's going to be stuck in a range? Yes. Then I deconstructed it properly. You also have the outside meta to look at and say, okay, well, what if we break below this trend? Where can it go? Because then your range is from here to here, right? So they're kind of two different gears that you have to do. So you might want to do both. And then if you take one trade that kind of hits here and it doesn't really go your way and you get out of trade and you lose your money, at least you're ready for the second range. Like, well, that was really bad, but at least you're ready for, that's also really bad. Here, let's just do a level. At least you're ready for that splitting of that range from down here, like all the levels you'd have down here, like I have marked, just to say like, okay, well, what is actually happening? At least if you lose one trade here, you're ready to take the bounce there and you make, 3 or 4 times as much anyways off the bounce of this range. So then it's like, yeah, because quite simply, like if you do break this trend here and you do move down the range, like you're going to go down, you're going to test inside of this range somewhere, and then you're going to come back up to see if this range can break, right? So there's a trade here, there's a trade here, and those are big trades. Those are big, massive trades, right? But that's only if the bottom of this breaks. So you have that inner look where we just deconstructed kind of like the current, what was happening. We have one outer look that we deconstructed, which was this guy from back in here, which was the very knife catches at the top. So that's those top knife catches. So we deconstructed one part of the outer range, but this would be the next part of the outer range that you need to deconstruct because these are tied, right? Because if this fails, this is attacking this right here. And then your range goes like that, right? For like however long. So that's the outer range that we would need to deconstruct. And we did one part, we just didn't do the second part of the outer range. And then we did both parts of deconstructing the inner range. So deconstructing those ranges is how you start to say it and in a very advanced way. Like, how do I work with levels and what do I do? And then just remember those 3 things I told you and you're kind of Gucci. You're kind of good. You're kind of ready to rock and roll.
Yes.